Hello and welcome back to the video lecture series for Introduction to the Art of Programming Using Scala. In this chapter we've been learning about object orientation and how we can actually write code in an object-oriented way. But so far I've just shown you simple examples of things like creating a class and using some of the features of classes, and then more recently object declarations. We need to actually put this into action, and we need to write something that is a little bit larger. Because what object orientation is really good at is writing larger programs. And the thing is, the way that you should go about building an object-oriented program is different than the way you would have gone about building the stuff that we've done before, the scripts. With the scripts, you were thinking about what functions you were going to break stuff down into and how you were going to pass data between those functions. And that's not how you think about object orientation. When you have a problem and you're going to solve it in an object-oriented way, your top-down approach, you still have a top-down approach, but it changes in nature. And that you start thinking of, okay, what are my objects that I'm going to use in here, and what do these objects have the ability to do? What does each one need to know, and what does it need to have the ability to do? And so what I'd like to do in this video is start off the process of us writing a little example of this, and I'm going to write a game. So I'm going to create my first file, and because the style we're doing this, I'm going to split this across multiple files. I am going to have it so that every major either class or object, or class and companion object pair, goes in its own file. So the main for this is going to go inside of a game main. Now in Scala you don't have to match the name of the file and the name of what goes inside of it. However, you generally should. Okay? There are some specific reasons why Scala doesn't force you to do that, but it's a good habit to get into, because otherwise it can be really hard to find where things are in your source code. So this is supposed to be where my main method is. And so as we saw, our main needs to take an array of strings, and it returns unit. And now at this point we have to kind of pause and say, okay, well, what game are we going to write? And I want to write something that is at least has enough complexity so that you care, and a small enough amount of complexity that we can actually do it in a fairly short period of time. This might wind up taking 2 videos, but I don't want this to take 5 videos to have to develop this little program. And so what I was thinking we could do is have something where it pops up a window, and in the middle of the window is your player, which will be, I'm not going for pretty graphics here. You could augment this using the stuff that you learned back in part 1 about how to load in graphics and stuff. I'm just going to draw things that are circles for a variety of reasons. Not only is it easy for me to draw, it's easy for me to do distance calculations and check to see when things are intersecting one another. But there will be a circle here in the middle that represents the player, and then there will be enemies that are formed outside of the area that the player can see, and then they will start moving in toward the center, and they'll move in at certain speed. We can think about some of the details as we go, and one of the things about this is we'll probably have to test it out and see what actually works. And you have to stop them by placing bombs, and so you can click to place a bomb. And what I'd like to do to make this interesting is if you make it so that short clicks just place a little bomb. So a little bomb, it gets placed instantly and it takes out a very small area. The longer you hold it, the bigger the blast for the bomb will become, and the more enemies it can wipe out. Of course, by holding it in one place, you're not hitting other areas. It'd be interesting to see if later on we should make it so that your bombs can't hit you, because if your bombs hit you, then it takes you out. Anyway, so with that much of an introduction, I can start thinking about what needs to go into this. And one of the first things that comes to my mind is the fact that we are going to have to use all of our we're going to need the swing library. I'm probably going to want to use the java.awt.geom code for drawing my ellipses and whatnot. And then what happens inside of here? Well, I need a frame. The frame could be declared inside of main, or it could be just declared inside of this object here. I'm going to go for the object level frame, and we'll make this a main frame. And then inside of main, I'll just open that frame. Title equals a little game. Center on screen. Size. Actually, I won't set the size here. Contents equals game panel. I'm making this fairly simple. I'm not going to bother putting in menus or other things that we've seen before, because I really want to focus on the object-oriented aspect of the thought process. And when you, at this point, maybe you can have going through your head, when I describe that game, what are the objects? What does each one of those objects need to know, and what does it need to be able to do? And because we've combined those together, the information it knows and what it does, we know that we are creating objects to do this. Val game panel is a new panel. Override def paint. G.setPaint color dot white, and I have a big white background. G.fill 0, 0, size dot width, size dot height. Now if we try to compile this, and this is one thing that you know, if you're coding in this way with the VI, compile frequently. Don't write too many lines of code and then try to see, oh, I wonder if that works. And especially the earlier on you are in your coding, the more you need to do this. So, two errors here. One of which is the fact that we haven't imported color yet. Okay. Another of which is the fact that I said fill instead of fill rect. It compiles, and we can run it. Oh, and there we go. Little bitty window popping up right there. It was centered. How about we also put inside of here preferred size equals new dimension of 600, 600. Recompile. See if there are errors from things not being imported. Nope, that was happy. Okay, there we go. So that looks reasonable. For the size of our window, we have our mouse. And after painting a solid white, this should do the following. Draw enemies, draw player, draw bombs. Okay. And okay, that's doing this nicely in comments. And what I'd actually like to do here is have a val for enemies. And actually this one will be a var enemies equals a list of enemy. Now, of course, at this point, I have just broken the ability to compile this because I don't have a type called enemy. We'll have to come back to that in a bit. Var bombs equals list of bomb. I also don't have a type called bomb, but I'm doing this in a top-down approach. I'm thinking of what I need, and I'm just writing it in, assuming that I have it, and I will have to go back and add it in to make it so this compiles. The player is actually a little bit easier in the sense that the player can probably just be done as g dot set paint color dot. I'm going to go with green player g dot fill new ellipse 2D. The center would be 0.5 times size dot width minus, let's say I'm going to use a radius of 20 pixels on this. 0.5 times, that's neither 5 nor times, 5 times size dot height minus 20, and for the size of the circle it's going to be 20 by 20. Okay, so this is going to draw, or sorry, it's 40 by 40. So this is going to draw a circle with a radius of 20, a diameter of 40, that sits in the middle of the screen. At least that's what it's supposed to do. Of course, we've lost the ability to compile at this point. Oh, and this should be an ellipse 2D dot double with a capital D. Now, how could we make this so that it compiles? Well, we need types for enemy and bomb. So real quick, why don't we come over here and let's vi enemy dot Scala. I have no idea what's going to go into enemy yet. We haven't programmed that far. Okay, technically I have an idea, but we haven't programmed far enough, so I'm going to leave it blank. And I'm going to do the same thing for bomb. No dot Scala there. Now what happens if we try to compile? Notice it says it still didn't find them. And you're like, but I created those files. This is one of the things about the Scala compiler. And because it does not require that you match names, we are going to have to tell it all the files that we want. Now, normally we might be in a directory where the only files were the ones associated with our project, in which case I could do star.scala. In this case, I still have these other files that we've written, some of which are scripts, and they will not compile nicely. So now that I compile and tell it which files to compile, I run this, and there indeed is our player there, and everything kind of appears happy. So let's go back to the game main. And as we write this out, we're going to figure out the things that we need to do in order to be able to, the stuff that we have to put inside of our enemies. And technically inside of our bombs as well. Let me go ahead and put back in the comment so that we know what this is doing later on. Enemies. Set paint. Now this is an interesting question. Might normally like to go for red, but red just seems like the right color for a bomb. So how about I go with color dot blue? Not know if that really says enemy to me, but red says explosion much more than even more than it says enemy. So after I've set the color to blue, what I want to do is I want to run through all the enemies and draw them. Now, the way we would have done this previously would have been we would have had like a case class for the enemies, and we would have run through it, and we would have put the drawing code right here. We could still do that. However, in some ways, the object-oriented way of thinking of this would be something like this. I want to run through all the enemies, and for each one, I want to tell it to draw itself to this graphics object G. And if we think about it that way, turns out, what do we want to do for the bombs? Well, we want to change the color to be red. And we want to tell each one of them to draw. Okay, now that has all automatically forced us to put in, so inside of both enemies and inside of both the enemy class and the bomb class, we need a method called draw that will draw whatever they are. Now in this case, the draw is just going to be filling in a circle. But the thing to note that's kind of interesting about this is where we've delegated the work to. In the approach that we would have done previously, this main method here, the panel, would have had to know the locations of all the enemies. It would have had to look up those locations and draw things at those locations. And the way in which things were drawn would have been very particular to this code right here. By doing it this way, note that I never, inside of here, actually find the location of an enemy. And so how we're handling locations is hidden from this piece of the code. Okay, this part of the code doesn't need to know how we handle locations. All it's going to do is it knows that each enemy and each bomb has inside of it the logic to draw itself, okay, to a graphics object. And so now if we go into the enemy, we know that we need inside of here a draw, and the draw takes a graphics 2D object. So we're going to have to do an import here. Import java.awt.graphics2d. Okay. And how should this work? Well, we kind of said we're just going to draw these as little ellipses. So this would be a g.fill of new ellipse 2d.double of, let's say I was going to make them 4 pixels across. Or sorry, y minus 2, 4, 4. Okay, problems that we have. We have not imported Java AWT geom ellipse 2D. We also have no such thing as x and y, and that is potentially a problem. Well, where should we have that? When we create an enemy, it probably needs to have a location. Now, the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to put some private vars. We discussed the fact that in general vars should be private. Sure, we'll go with a double, comma, private var, y is a double. And then we can draw this at whatever location it was given, and it's when we create the enemies that we have to give them locations. Quite honestly, I have just changed so much stuff that I'm going to copy that over and change the one-word enemy to bomb because everything else in here is going to be pretty much the same, except maybe what happens down inside of here. And this is an interesting question as to what happens when a bomb draws itself. How big should it look? I'm actually going to make the bombs look smaller. So they'll be 2 pixels in diameter. And we've already said they come out as a different color. But it seems to me that there should be more to a bomb. Okay? So to understand this, let's go ahead and let's recompile, make sure that we haven't introduced any errors in here. This isn't actually going to do anything extra because we haven't made it so we have no enemies, we have no bombs. We just have lists that could include enemies and bombs. But the way I want the game to play is that enemies will be coming in straight towards the player from all over the place, and you have to go and click and drop bombs. Okay. There should be a delay between when you drop a bomb and when it actually goes off. Okay, so you can't just click exactly where you want it to go off. From the description that I've just given you, you also know that when I click, if I click and hold, I get a bigger bomb than otherwise. And of course, where the bomb is located depends upon where I clicked. So we can already add at least one other thing inside of here. Size is a double. That's how big of a radius is going to be hit by this. Okay. And then what else needs to go inside of here? Well, because there's going to be a delay between when the bomb is laid down and when it explodes, we need to have some way of keeping track of that. And so I'm going to add inside of here a private var. We'll call it delay. Could call it fuse length or something. I don't know. Delay, oh no, we'll start off at 20. We'll see if that even makes sense. What is this? This is how many times how many iterations you go through before the bomb explodes. So it starts off at 20. After we've gone through one step, it's going to go down to 19, 18, 17. And when it hits 0, the bomb explodes. Okay. And so one of the things I'm going to do inside of here is delay minus equals 1. Okay. I want to do two other things inside of here as well. A private var that will be a Boolean for detonated. And I'm going to start this off as false. So when you first lay down a bomb, it has not yet been detonated. We have a delay. The delay keeps getting one smaller every time we draw it. I need to do a check here. If delay is less than 0, then I am going to set detonated to true. Okay, so our countdown has gotten all the way down. We're going to switch to detonation. If detonated, I want to draw something different. Now it's not going to be that much different. It's just if it's detonated, it's not going to show up as just a 2x2. It's going to show up as a 2 times size by 2 times size. Okay, so whatever size it is, that's how big it will be. Another thing that would be significant to do here is, well, actually, we'll keep going and we'll come back to this and see what we're lacking. It's one of these cases where the more advanced you get as a programmer, the more you're going to foresee the things that you need. As a novice programmer, you're not going to foresee things much in the future. Basically, you're going to trip upon it, and then when you trip upon it, you realize, oh, hey, I need to deal with this. Whereas a more advanced programmer will be able to see the stumbling blocks several steps ahead and prepare for them. And I'm going to try to turn off that foreseeing what's going to happen to us so that we can actually get things to the point where we run them and you can see what happens. Okay. So if we come back here into our game main, we have our frame, we have our panel. I want to be able to place bombs. Okay, right now we don't have that happening, so we need to be able to place bombs. We also need to have enemies appear. I'll start with the placing bombs. So inside of our panel, first we need to listen to. I'm only going to listen to mouse.clicks. I don't care about drags or anything else like that. What I want is a press and a release. Okay, and so the way this works, reactions plus equals case where the event is a mouse pressed, we're going to do one thing, and the case where the event is a mouse released, we're going to do another thing. And what exactly are we going to do? Well, in the mouse pressed, we kind of need to keep track of, oh, the mouse has been pressed, and then just start keeping track of time in a sense. So that to me says, hey, let's go, these are vars, just to be thorough about this, I'll make them private. Turns out that in this case, it's not as significant. In fact, I'll make these vals private too, for one simple reason, they're mutable. Okay. The only time when you can really feel very safe about making something, a data element, public is if it is a val and it references something that is immutable. But both frames and panels are mutable, they can change. I don't want to let outside code get access to them so that it could change them. Private var time equals 0. So this is going to be a counter that starts at 0, and every time that we run through, and we'll have to create a timer for this, we will run through and add a value, add 1 to the time. So when the mouse is pressed, what we need to do is we need to remember where it was pressed, and we need to know what the current time is. So this sounds to me like, actually we can do this in here. We can make these more local. I'm going to reduce the scope as much as possible. Var pressed x equals 0, var pressed y equals 0, var pressed time equals 0. And inside of pressed, all I'm going to do is set those values. So pressed x equals e dot point dot x, pressed y equals e dot point dot y, press time. Now let's be consistent here. Equals the time. Now, so what happens when you release? Well, when you release, you get so we need to add a new bomb to the list, and it needs to be at that location, and its size needs to be determined by something dealing with how long you held it down. So the size for this should be, and notice that I'm placing it where you press, not where you release. I could change this if I wanted, but bombs cons equals a new bomb at pressed x, pressed y. By the way, part of the reason for making it where it's pressed and not where it's released is actually a gameplay issue. If you make it where it's released, they can just, as soon as they unclick for one bomb, they would immediately hold it down, move the mouse around, and release it where they want it to be. And that way they would maximize the size of the bomb. By making it where it's pressed, they actually can't start the click, and they can't start the counter for making it bigger until they get right by it. And so how about we say, this is another one of these constants that will require 3 plus time minus press time. Okay. So the longer you go, the bigger these things get. And just to make sure that it happens, I'm going to put a repaint in there. We could make an argument that as soon as we put the timer in, we won't need the repaint. Seem to have typed everything nicely. And hopefully you can see I am placing bombs here. The bombs aren't doing anything. The doing stuff will require having a timer, but we'll add that in the next video because this video is long enough now. So in the next video, we'll come back. We will add in a timer. We will make it so that the enemies start moving, the bombs start exploding, and the bombs can take out enemies and finish up the game.